Okay, so let's go ahead and review a couple of the NURBS modeling tools that we're going to use to build hard surface objects, specifically buildings. The first of which is the NURBS CV curve tool. So if you go to create, for the create and the CV curve tool, it doesn't matter what mode of the package you're in, animation, modeling, surfaces, whatever, they're always going to show up. So it can be deceptive. You might think that you're in the modeling when you go here and find this, but you're actually in another portion of the package. So I always just change it to polygon mode and then go to create, CV curve tool. Whenever you're going to, this is a NURBS modeling tool. Does anyone know what NURBS means? Non-uniform rational B-spline. All right, and that's just a mathematical term for what the math is behind drawing these curves are. So I'm going to open up this curve, and because it's a NURBS tool, whenever you use the NURBS tools in Maya, it's always a good idea to open up the settings with it. And the reason for that is because under the NURBS tools, there's usually a whole host of settings that are available to you for the tool, and they're pretty much all important. All right, each setting is going to give you a different result. So I went ahead and launched the Create CV Curve tool with the settings. And then for the curve degree, let's just go ahead and do the first one as linear. So I'm going to click linear. What this is I call this a polyline, which means there's no such thing as an actual polyline. They don't exist. This is just my kind of slang term for this. And the reason I call it a polyline is because if you use a NURBS curve, CV, create CV curve with a degree 1, what happens is wherever you drop a control vertex, it will actually draw a line directly between it, which is kind of like what a polygon edge does between two vertices. All right. So that's one way to use it. The other way, and notice that that just draws kind of a very straight line. If you want to back out of whatever your last line segment you drew, you're just going to hit the backspace key, and it will undo your last. And I want to show you something else. So I'm going to undo all the way out of that. When I click the first one, see how it draws this little yellow box here? That denotes the start of that curve. And when I click and draw the second one, see, instead of a box, it's got a little yellow U. And that U basically just tells you what direction the curve is flowing. So it's saying the curve starts here at the box, and the curve starts flowing in this direction. That's denoted by the U. And then I click the third one, and now it's just a regular old vertex, and so on and so forth. So with the NURBS curve, it always has a start that's denoted by a box, and a direction, which is the very next CV, and it'll put a U on it. And that tells you. Now when you're done drawing the curve, if you don't want to backspace out, I'll backspace out a couple times just to show that. If you're done with the curve, all you have to do is hit the Enter key, and that completes the curve and draws it. All right. So that is a CV curve degree 1. Now we're going to draw another CV curve. So I'm going to go to Create CV Curve tool. I'm going to open up the settings again, and this time I'm going to change it to degree 3 cubic. All right. And notice what happens here. If I click here once, I get the little box that shows me that's the start of my NURBS curve. I click again and I get the U, but notice that it hasn't actually drawn a line. All right, so I'm going to click one more time and still no line. And then I click one more time. Oh, finally there's a line. And the reason for that is because the degree here, cubic, it basically means that it needs at least 3 control vertices before it can draw a line. All right, so it needed 3 and then finally a 4th, and then it'll draw the line between those, which are, these things are called control vertices, these little dots here. All right, and these are great for if you want to draw something smooth, because it allows you to do that and get a nice organic form. Okay, so once your curves are created, these are basically just another geometry type that's inside of Maya. So Maya has a number of geometry types inside of the software. There's polygons, there are NURBS, and there's also sub-Ds. Those are the main 3. In this class, we're going to pretty much focus on just polygons and NURBS. And when we do NURBS, I'm going to teach you guys how to use NURBS basically as a means to create polygon geometry. And the reason for that is because polygon geometry is pretty much the dominant form of geometry that's used pretty much universally. From film to games to everything's pretty much now in polygons. And the reason why there's NURBS and polygons is because in a earlier day in time, 10, 15 years ago, polygons and NURBS were competing with each other for use. And the way it worked was NURBS were generally used in film industry and polygons were generally used in the game industry. And what's happened now is that the tools have developed to the state where now they've converged and they're both kind of used together. And then everything gets pretty much converted to a polygon at render time. And the translation for you guys is that you're glad this happened because it was really pain back in the day. And now that everything's polygons, it's actually awesome. All right. So now that we have these are NURBS curves, that's the type of geometry created, you can select them and see them in your scene by going to Window. And if we open up the, I'm looking for the outliner, there we go. You can see here that we have curve 1, curve 2, curve 3. So you can select them in a couple different ways. You could either select them here in the interface, or you could select them here in the outliner. The reason I'm showing you the outliner is because at times your curve will get buried into a polygon object, which we'll see here in a second, and it might be useful for you to pop open the outliner and be able to select it in this way. All right. So those are just NURBS curves. Now, NURBS curves, just like everything else in Maya, has an object level. So right now this is in the green. That shows that I'm on this curve on the object level, or a sub-object level, which I can get to by right-clicking on the geometry. And we see here we have curve point, and I can show you the curve points by just clicking and dragging a curve point. We have a control vertex, which you saw when we created it. Those are essentially like the equivalent of vertices for poly objects. And then we have edit points, which are just another means for moving the curve around. So if you wanted to move the curve by the control vertex or the edit point, either way it doesn't matter. They will both move the curve. Just do it in slightly different ways. We have a hull, which this one does not have because it's a degree 1. And then we have object mode, which takes you back to the top. All right. So we'll do this on the one that does have a degree 3, and I can show you. If you go to hull, hulls are basically as if those are like the lines that are being drawn through. So imagine the hull as like the degree 1 curve on top of the degree 3 curve. All right. That's hard to describe, but it's like a simplified version of your curve. It's almost like the polygon control cage for this detailed line. So for you guys in this class, we're really not going to use edit points or hulls or curve points that much. You're going to pretty much always stay at the control vertex level, which is how you're going to manipulate that curve and reshape it. And you can select the CVs the same way you do any other PC geometry. Group them. You can select, shift select to add to the selection, control to deselect. You can grab them in a group, you can scale them. Pretty much whatever you want. Alright, so play with that for a sec, and I'm going to come around and check it out and make sure you guys know what you're doing. Okay, so now that we've learned how to use and create the curves and manipulate them, let's go ahead and start making stuff with them. So I'm going to grab these lines and I'm just going to delete them. And now let's say I want to make a like a garden urn, like a Grecian urn for a garden environment. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the Create tool, and I'm going to go and grab a CV curve tool. And I'm going to do first one with cubic. So sometimes these tools can get messed up and you might click in here. It's always a good idea to just reset the tool before you use it to make sure there aren't any settings that you accidentally tweak. Okay, so now I'm going to use a degree 3 cubic. So that's going to make a nice smooth curve. And I'm just going to draw the shape of my urn. Another cool thing with this tool, so backspace to back out from the last CV you dropped, is if you hold down the shift key, it will draw the next CV parallel to the last one that you dropped. So it's just a way to make a nice straight line without having to actually do it via eyeball. So once I'm done, I can just go ahead and hit enter, and you see here that my curve is created. And now I want to turn this into something three-dimensional. And the way I'm going to do that is by popping over here to the perspective view. And I'm going to revolve this around the y-axis and create a shape with it. So in order to revolve it, we have to go change our menu from the polygon menu set to the surfaces menu set. And right here under the menu sets, we're going to change from polygons to surfaces.
After you're done with the shape.
Yeah, once you're done with the shape. And then the surfaces menu set allows you to perform some further operations. And one of which that I want to get into is revolve. All right. So we're going to go into the surfaces menu set, and then we're going to go to the menu, and we're going to say surfaces, revolve, and we're going to open up the settings because this is a NURBS tool and there's a ton of parameters available, and if you don't have them set up specifically, you're going to get very different results pretty much every time. So here we have the revolve options. On your axis, I want to do Y because I want to be straight up and down. Pivot, I'm going to use the objects pivot, which means if I hit the W key, we can see the pivot is right there. So remember, you can move the pivot. If I hit the insert key and I can move the pivot, so I can have the object revolve around the pivot wherever it is. In this case, I specifically drew this on the origin to make sure that my pivot was on the origin. So therefore, I don't want to change my pivot point whatsoever. So we're going to revolve with the axis preset of Y. Pivot, we're going to do object. Surface degree, this time we'll do cubic. And then tolerance, you can leave that default, which is none. Segments, we can do, let's do 12. And then curve range, leave that default, which is complete. Output geometry, we're going to set to polygons. And then we're going to set the tessellation method. First, the type we want to set to quads. Always want to use quads. And then the tessellation method we're going to set to general. And I'll show you what this does. And under the number of U and V, I'm going to change these to 12 and 12. And then I'm going to say apply. And when I do that, we can see here that we've created basically an approximation of this shape. And the reason why it's an approximation is due to the NURBS tessellation settings, which if I select the object, I can go over here and grab under the NURBS tessellate input node. And we can change the number in U and the number in V to something much higher. And we can get a much better representation of the object. So one of the coolest things about the NURBS surface tools is that they retain a history on the object. So if you remember that setting that we set up here, so if I go back into surfaces, revolve, and we had all these settings for pretty much every setting that's in here, output, geometry type, etc., can be accessed through the channel box here under the inputs for this object, and the input is called NURBS tessellate 1. If I expand that, I can change the output type to triangles. It'll turn it to triangles. So pretty much all those settings that we just tweaked in the options box can be tweaked out here just by going to the appropriate dialog and changing it. So all I did was under the number of U and V to smooth my object out. One of the things that's weird with this is that it stops you at 32. So if you want to put a higher number of U and V segments than 32, you actually have to go in here and type it. So if I do 100 by 100, there we go. All right, so that's cool, but that maybe lacks a little bit of control in terms of how precise you can be when creating stuff this way. So I kind of want to show you a more advanced method for creating objects, and that's using the CV curve tool. I'm going to do this exact same earn again, but this time I'm going to create it with a polyline or a NURBS CV curve with the degree 1. And I'm going to drop basically a vertex just wherever specifically I want an edge in my final geometry. So I'm going to drop a control vertex here. I'm going to draw this in a little bit different way, but I'm going to achieve the same result, but it's going to be optimized. Okay, so I'm going to draw basically that same earn. This time, though, I've kind of done it in a way that I'm going to optimize it so I don't have all this extraneous extra geometry. So I'm going to select my curve again, and I'm going to go in here to make sure I'm in the Surfaces menu set, which I am. And then I'm going to go to Surfaces, and I'm going to do Revolve with these settings. But instead of output geometry as a tessellation method general, I'm going to click the box that says Control Points. And what that's going to do, I'm just going to do it because it's easier for me to show you. Then it's going to, and I had a problem here. So my center was actually at the origin. So if I wanted to revolve about my curve, I'm going to need to snap it to the base of my curve. So I'm going to do that. And I'm going to revolve it one more time. So I'm going to say Surfaces Revolve. And by doing control points as my method, what has happened here, if I select the curve and then I say control vertex, you can see here that wherever there's a control vertex, there's also just one edge, which is kind of nice. Because what this has allowed me to do by doing it this way, using control points, is it's allowed me to basically do an optimized mesh. So I've made this mesh with only the minimum number of edges that I need to define that shape. And I've made the mesh so that this is my control cage object. And then all I need to do to get, so this would work at a game level, so game res, right? But if I wanted this to be film res like this one over here, all I would need to do is come over here to the polygons menu set and just add a smooth to it and see what happens. It turns it from what was a game res control cage to a more of, this would be like a next gen game model. And if I increase the number of divisions, I could get this all the way up to a film grade model just by increasing the number of subdivisions. So just kind of a more advanced way for you guys to model is by using the, you'll hear me say it from here on out, I'm going to call this a polyline. So if you use a polyline and you basically add the edges exactly where you want them, you can get a nice minimalist construction that then you can smooth out later. So I'm getting, the reason why I was just popping back and forth here is Maya's giving me like this kind of extra edge in here when I revolve the mesh. I shouldn't be doing that. So now we have an asset that can be a game asset by changing the divisions to 0, or a film asset by changing the degree to 3, and you have one asset that's basically serves all purposes. You'll notice here that I have this little spike here at the side. Can anyone tell me why that's occurring? Yeah, because the vertices are not welded. So it doesn't automatically weld the verts, so I have to select them all. And then I can go into polygon mode, and I can say Edit Mesh, Merge, and merge the verts. And then now, this is probably going to break, but I just want to see if it will or not. Now if I turn the smooth on, see, it's not going to remember. The smooth was put on before I welded the verts, so it's not going to remember. So in order to get back to 0, I'm going to have to first delete the history on this object. So I'm going to select it, and I'm going to say Edit, Delete by Type, History. And then now when I smooth it, that shell should be gone. There we go.
When you want to move it,
You want to move it? You can just go ahead and move it.
what happens to the line? Does it matter?
Yeah, the line, so on this one, that's a good question. What happens when I move it? On this one, it's going to work, but this one actually has a history still, I believe. And the cool thing about that is that you can actually take that line and you can change the shape of your object to get other shapes, which is very cool. All right. So problem is that I think your question was if you move it, because there's a history on both the line and the object, if you grab them both and try to move them simultaneously, you'll get it. This is what's called a double transform. And so you either have to move one or the other. You can't move them both simultaneously unless you delete the history. So if you select both the objects and then you say Edit, Delete by Type, History, now you can move them both because there's no history and you won't get that double transform. Yeah, so what you have here is you have kind of a compound object. I'm going to leave the history on this object. This revolve is using the NURBS curve, which is the white object here, and then the result of that NURBS curve being revolved around that axis to create this poly object. So you essentially have the line being used to revolve to create the poly object. So it's kind of a compound object with history until you delete the history. All right. So the way you select these, and it can be easy to select them both, I just usually marquee drag around them both to select them. And then if I want the NURBS curve selected, I'll deselect the poly object. And then you right click here and you can get to the sub-object level, control vertex. And that would allow you to grab the control vertices and move them. And if you want to change the shape, etc. Alright. So that's the revolve tool. Let's learn a few more. Let's go ahead and learn how to use the extrude tool. So I'm going to go into the side orthographic viewport. And let's say we want to make like a power line or a telephone line for our scene. Let's go ahead and go into the create, and we're going to do a CV curve. And I want to open up the settings on that, so I'm going to reset it to 3 cubic because I want this line to be nice and smooth. And then let's say we got our little power line that comes up, comes to a peak, comes up, comes to a peak, etc. And we need now to make that into a cable, right? So we're going to go ahead and always you want your shape to be perpendicular to the path that you're projecting it on. So this path is drawn straight back to front. So what I want to do is I want to create a circle here. So I'm going to go to Create, NURBS Primitives, and I'm going to do a circle. And I'm going to open up the settings because this one I also want to do as degree linear. And I want the number of sections to be 8. And I'm just going to go ahead and create this. And then I'm going to hit the E key to rotate it. And then I want to snap it to my line. All right. So snapping you can either do by toggling the curve snap here, up here in the interface. And that'll keep the curve snap locked. Or you can just hold down the C key, which will temporarily make the curve snap active while I'm holding down the C key. So it just toggles it for a short period of time. And what that'll allow me to do is basically just snap my curve to the line. Now, the way the curve snap works, it's a little confusing. See this little blue box here? Think of that as like a gun sight, all right? So if I wanted to line up and shoot this curve with a gun, I'd have to line that up to be sighted inside of there, right? Now, when I hold down, right now it's not going to do anything, but see how I got my sight on the curve? Now if I hold down the C key, that tells me I'm in curve snap mode. What I have to do is I have to line my gun sight up so that that curve intersects the sight. And then once I do that, when I click on it again, see what happens? It's going to snap immediately to the curve. Now, if I don't line the sight up onto the curve, it won't snap to it. All right? You have to move it so it lines up onto the thing, and then click it one more time, and then it'll snap to it. And you're probably going to say, how does that work? How does that work? And my answer to you is do it until you understand it. So you got to line it up and sight it up, and then you can get it to snap. All right, now snapping is important. Not necessarily, this tool isn't going to work if you don't do that. But what it does is it allows you to keep things kind of straight in the scene and know what goes to what. So this is just my habit that I've gained for 10 years of modeling using these tools. And there's very, very good reasons, which if you don't do it, you'll find out real quick why I do that. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and select my shape, and then I'm going to select my path. So there's a very specific order for this. You have to select the shape first, and then the shape walks along the path. So just think of it that way. Shape walks along the path. That's the order. Once I've done that, then I'm going to go into the Surfaces menu set, and I'm going to go to Surfaces, and I want to select the Extrude tool. And I'm going to go ahead and open up the settings because it's an NURBS tool, and it's going to have a ton of settings just like all of them. So specifically, the settings for the Extrude options are going to be Style, you're going to want to put Tube. Result Position, you're going to want to put at Path. Pivot, you're going to want to put Component. And then Orientation, you're going to want to put Profile Normal. All right? Curve Range, we'll leave Default, which is complete. And Output Geometry, we're always going to change to polygons. And then Tessellation Method, this time I'm going to go ahead and do control points. Or no, I'm sorry, I want to do general. So Tessellation Method general. And then I always change these to like 12 by 12 to start. And then I'm going to go ahead and say apply. And we have basically our little power line here, which doesn't look like one because it's not resolved enough. So we're going to select the object, go into the NURBS tessellate input, and then we can dial up the number of divisions. So I don't want that to be 100. I want this one to be 100. And see, now we've got a nice smooth curve. If you want to change the size of that, so to make it smaller like an actual telephone cable, all you have to do is select the shape and scale it down. And that's pretty much it. So that's the Extrude tool. We have another, probably a little bit more advanced use of that tool, and let's just go ahead and do that now. I'm going to go ahead and create a CV curve, degree 1. And let's say I want to make a cornice of a building. So I'm going to turn on my grid snap here for a sec. And that's our building. And then we have a shape. This is going to be kind of like a New York brownstone. I'm going to hide that one. Alright, so I want to make sure that I draw my shape perpendicular to the path. Alright, and since if I click on control vertex mode, you can see here this little box and then the U. That tells me that my path starts here at the box and it goes in this U direction. So I need my shape to be perpendicular to the start of that path, which is going to be in here in the front viewport. Alright, so now I'm going to go here into the front viewport, and I'm going to create a CV curve. Open up the settings. This one I want to be degree 1 linear. I'm just going to reset that real fast to make sure I didn't tweak anything else out, and then click 1 for linear. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and draw my shape for my cornice for like my building. And there we go. There's my cornice shape. What I always like to do here is see how my pivot for this object is all the way over here at the origin. By default, whenever you create a NURBS curve, Maya will snap the pivot point to the origin rather than where you drew it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say modify center pivot, and that's going to center my pivot to the center of my object. But then I usually do one more thing. I hit the insert key to go into pivot mode. I hold down the C key for snap. I line the gun sight up, so that sight's got to be on the line. I click it one more time. Now it snaps to, and what I've done here is I moved the pivot point of this line to be at the base of the line itself. And what that's going to allow me to do is then hold down the C key one more time, and I'm going to snap it to that line. And then what happens is I know that when I extrude this line along this curve, it's going to extrude right from that point all the way around the curve, which is going to make things nice and clean. So I'm going to scale this down a little bit. So I want to select my shape, and the shape what? Walks along the path. So now I'm going to select the path, and then I'm going to go to surfaces, and I'm going to say extrude, and I want to make sure that I have style to result position at path, pivot, component, orientation, profile normal, output type, polygons, and then this time I'm going to change it to control points. And the reason for that is because I drew this thing knowing exactly where I wanted the edges to be, as if I were modeling this out of polygons to begin with. And now I'm going to go ahead and say apply, and look what happens. Beautiful little building cornice with very minimal amount of work. And all the edges is perfectly optimized for poly output, and yeah, in a matter of seconds. Okay, so I want to show you another tool in the NURBS tools that are very useful for building buildings. I'm going to just hide that one. And this one is called Loft. All right. So let's say you have a floor plan for a complex building. So I'm going to go to Create, CV Curve Tool, open the settings. I want it to be linear. And let's say it's a castle or a fortress or something. And so you have all these different cutbacks.
Which tools are they?
CV Curve Tool. I'm just making a floor plan here. So a fortress or something. And I want to make a set of walls out of this. So I drew my line. I'm going to hit the W key. I'm going to hit Control D, and then I'm just going to move one up. And then I'm going to select the bottom one and the top one. And then I'm going to go into, make sure I'm in the Surfaces menu set. And I'm going to go to Surfaces, Loft, and I'm going to open the Loft settings. And this time I'm going to use parameterization, uniform, surface degree I want to be linear, and that's because I want there to just be an edge wherever I have a control vertex. And then output geometry I want to do polygons, and I want to do tessellation method control points, where it's just going to put an edge wherever I put a control vertex. And then I'm going to say apply, and boom, there we go. We've got our poly object, which is basically the floor plan. And then if I wanted to revolve that, or if let's say I wanted to put a cornice on that building, what could I do? I could just go grab my cornice shape in this other object here, and I'm going to duplicate it. It's always a good idea to duplicate it. Don't reuse one that you already have. And I'm going to take this one, I'm going to snap it to this guy. And I believe that was the beginning of my line. And I'm doing this because I want to show you how this can mess up on you. So now I have my shape. My shape what? It walks along my path. So now I'm going to say surfaces, extrude, and make sure I have tube, at path, component, profile normal, curve range complete, output geometry, polygons, tessellation method, control points. So I'm going to say apply. And then look what happens here. See how this is all kind of messed up and weird? The reason for that is because I did not make sure that when I drew this shape that it was perpendicular to my path. And it did reverse it, so you say, well, oh no, all you got to do is reverse it. But even when I reverse it, look what happened. It's all jangled and messed up, all right? And the problem with that is that, again, you have to draw these so that they're perpendicular to the start of your line, right? And the way you find that is right here. This is the box, and that's the U. So when I draw this shape, I need to make sure that I draw it perpendicular to the box and the U, the direction it's going. So if I can find that, so I need to be in a viewport where I can see the box and the U. So now if I draw this again, so I have to redraw that shape. So if I go to Create, CV Curve Tool, I'll make this one a little simpler. And I'm going to modify center of the pivot. Hold down the C key, snap it. And now if I select the shape and the path, whoops, shape, path, and then I say surfaces, extrude, it's still going to mess up. And I'm glad that it messed up twice, because this also happens. So now I've drawn the shape perpendicular to the path and it's still messing up. So that tells me that there's something wrong with probably this other line as well, all right? And I don't know why it did that, but I think it has something to do with the construction history. When I lofted it, it added a node to it, and it basically corrupted the input, bless you, of this line. So if I want to do this again and remove the artifact, sometimes in Maya and many other 3D programs, the only option you have to solve whatever problem you have is to just redo it. And this is going to be a case. So I'm going to go into the CV Curve Tool again, linear, and I know that that's my shape that I want. So I'm just going to kind of trace it over the existing. Okay, and then I'm going to move this one up. And then now, if I take this shape, so I select the shape walks along the path, and then I say surfaces extrude, and then look what happens. Sure enough, perfect. Okay, so it's going to happen to you. You're gonna use that tool, and you're gonna go. It's not going to do what you think, and you're going to say it must be broken, and you're right, but you're going to think that you can't fix it, and you're going to say I couldn't do this, and I'm going to say no, you could, because all you had to do was redraw both your lines. Make sure, start with I always start with a shape first, so draw that shape so it's perpendicular to the start of that line. If that doesn't solve it, then you have to redraw the line again, and then I would say 99% of the time that will solve the problem, as long as you have the same settings that I was using. All right. Okay, so let's use these tools to go ahead and actually build something. So I'm just going to go ahead and blow this all away. And what I did was I just wanted like a kind of a generic building that had not so generic that it was too boring to build. So I picked a French Quarter house in Louisiana, and I wanted to base it on an actual location so that we could actually see it, and also so that it would actually have a physical size related to it. All right, so by this point you've got your scene all blocked in, and now you're probably to the level where you got your 6-foot man in there, and now you're going to start building the structure at the street level, the sidewalks, the buildings, the doors, all that kind of stuff. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to set this scene up, and then we're going to build this house. All right, so the first thing we want to do is we want to determine how wide this street is. All right, so that's one car there. How wide would you say that car is? About 5 feet wide? Safe to say? I think that's safe to say. So then that would mean that this street is approximately 15 to 20 feet wide. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Maya, and I'm going to go ahead and set up my street first of all. So I'm going to go in here, and we're going to use that same system where one of these blocks equals 1 meter, and 1 meter is approximately 3 feet. So then it would basically be 5 of these blocks would equal 15 feet or 20 feet. So why don't we do 18, and that's kind of splitting the difference. So we'll do 6. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a CV curve, and I'm going to make it linear. And I don't need to build the entire street. So I'm just going to build a section of it. So I'm going to drop a curve there, and then I'm going to drop I don't need to drop another curve. I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate this one. And I'll turn on the snapping because I'm going to snap it perfectly. And so now we've got our 2 lines here, which are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 meters apart, which is 18 feet. So that represents our street. All right. So if we want to make the street, what do we got to do? We're just going to select this curve and this curve, and then we're going to go to surfaces, and we're going to say loft. And then this time I'm going to leave everything the same, except for I'm going to change the tessellation method to general. And the reason I'm going to do that is it's going to allow me to dial the resolution of the geometry that I'm about to create up or down. So I'm going to say apply. Boom, there we go. We got our road. And now if I want to add more geometry to that road, I can go into the NURBS tessellate settings, and I can increase the number of divisions in U and V. And whenever I create something, I'm always just trying to get the polygons to be somewhat square. So I'm going to try to find a setting here where basically these polygons are square between each other. All right. So there we go. That's our road. Now, what else do we have in the scene? We have curbs, right? So how would I do a curb? Can anyone tell me?
Select the polygons on the edges of the curve.
Yeah, you could do it that way. But that's probably a little less elegant than using the NURBS tools that we just learned. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select the line that I have. And it also lacks a construction history, which I'm going to get on this if I do it this way. So I'm going to go ahead and select that curve. I want to make my shape perpendicular to this curve, so I'm going to do it here in the side view. And I'm going to go ahead and create a CV curve. And I'm going to do it linear again. And I'm just going to go ahead and I have my snapping turned on. I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to create a curve, and I made this one like a little bit more organic than I probably normally would have, and that's because in the picture the curb's kind of all eroded and busted up. So I'm going to go ahead and complete that curve. And then I want to make sure that I got the scale right on the curve before I actually create it. Right? So how tall would you say a curb is? Yeah, this one looks like it's probably maybe like 6, 7, something like that. So that's safe. Let's just do that. All right. So if a meter is 3 feet, then 7 inches is probably just going to be about to here, something like that. Is that safe to say? I think it is. So I'm going to modify. I'm going to center the pivot on that shape that I just made. And then I also like to always, like I did before, change the pivot point to be at the base of the shape. So I'm going to line that up with the sights and put it on there. And I want to also, want to snap it. So I got my curb curve built here, and I just want to make sure that it's approximate scale to the scene. So we determined that the curve should probably be about probably 7 inches tall. So again, this box right here, is 1 meter, so that's 3 feet. So I'm going to go ahead and scale this guy down until that's probably about a foot. So I'm going to go down even further, and that looks pretty reasonable. And so now I'm going to just go ahead and move this curve shape into position. So I'm going to hold down the C for curve snap to simultaneously, or to temporarily enable the curve snapping. And then now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my road element and I'm going to create a new layer for it, just so I can hide it real quick. And it was kind of getting in the way with the snapping, so I just wanted to hide that real fast. And then so I want to slide my shape all the way down to the end of my curve here before I go ahead and make the curve. So now I have my shape, and my shape walks along my path. So I'm going to select the path, and now I want to go into the surfaces, and I want to use the extrude. And I'm going to say style, tube, result position at path, pivot, component, orientation, profile normal, output geometry, polygons, and then tessellation method. I'm going to also do general again, and I'm going to change these to 12 by 12. And I'm going to say apply, and there we go. It's built our curve now. So we got a polygon curve, and we got our road. And at this point I can hide the grid because I'm starting to establish a scale for my scene. And then we have the number of divisions here for the road, and I can just copy that for my curve. So we have 64, so all I have to do is select my curve. And for the number in U, I'm going to do 64. Oops, it's the opposite way around, 12. It'll be 64 in this degree. And now we have the road and the curve matching up 100%, which is can be important. And then now I don't have to model that curve twice, so I'm just going to go ahead and mirror it. So I'm going to select the object, and I'm going to say Edit, Duplicate Special. And I want to duplicate it, but I want to mirror it across the Z-axis. So I'm going to give it a scale of a -1 in Z, because it goes X, Y, and Z, so -1. And I'm going to say Apply, and boom, there we go. Now we got our road with both of our curves, and now we need a sidewalk, right? So let's go ahead and build a sidewalk. So if I were going to do this for real, and I wanted it to look as real as possible, I would probably go ahead and model each one of these sidewalk pieces as a separate chunk of the sidewalk, so that I could do things like, because it's kind of an old section of town, that way I could have the sidewalk chunks kind of broken up. If I wanted to cut one of them and break it up, and if I had to have them offset a little bit, I could do that. So what I want to do is I just want to determine how big is one of these soft sidewalk chunks here. It's kind of hard to see from this angle, so I'm going to move over here. And we can see here it's kind of about the size of this car, right? So we could say it's about 5 feet wide by what? About maybe 10 feet, something like that. All right, so let's go ahead and model one of those. It's pretty big. We could change that later if we wanted to. So 5 foot, just to make it easy on ourselves, why don't we do 6 feet wide by 12 feet, so it'll just be from here to here. So I'm going to go ahead and create a polygon primitive, and I'm going to use a cube, and I'm going to just go ahead and make the sidewalk chunk like so. And I want to give it a little bit of a depth, so I'm going to go over here. And that's the wrong dimension, it's got to be. Huh, how come height's not putting anything on there? Strange. Alright, let's create that again. So I'm going to create polygon primitives, and I'm going to do a cube. There we go. So I want to make it about, give it a thickness about what a sidewalk would have, which I have no idea what that actually is. So I'm just going to guesstimate it. And then now we've got a nice, also realistic gap between the sidewalk and the curb, which is how it would exist in the real world. And now I'm going to go ahead and just duplicate that several times. And because I just duplicated it and I didn't move it, what can I do here? I can go to Edit, Duplicate with Transform, which the hotkey for that is Shift D. So if I keep hitting Shift D a couple more times, I can basically have my sidewalk go off as much as I can to the road. Then I'm just going to go ahead and select all of these guys. I'm going to duplicate them simultaneously, and I'm going to move them. And then I'm going to grab all of them, and I'm going to Control D one more time, and I'm going to make the sidewalk about 2 units wide. And then now the cool thing about doing it this way is, for example, if I wanted to have the sidewalk a little fugly and turned up, I could do that. And if I wanted to crack these up later, I could also do that as well, so that you can kind of get a nice organic feel to that. All right, so now we want to build our house, right? So let's go ahead and look at our reference for that. So we've got our house here, and it's important when you're going to plan out your structure that you put the correct number of edges in places so that you can cut the windows out precisely where they go and have it kind of optimized. So the other thing you want to do is you want to have the edges broken in a way so that you can model, say, this window, and then you could model this door, and you could have them plug in to the same spot, and you could reuse this over and over again. So what I'm going to do here is how many, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 windows here, 1, 2, 3, 4 windows there, and then we're just going to kind of stop right up here before the balcony. So I'm going to do this section of the house. So then we're going to need an object with, I'm going to do a polygon primitive cube, and we're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 edges so that we have enough segments to break those windows and doors into there. All right, so we can model those in. And then we're just going to have 1, 2, 3 edges on the top. So let's go ahead and create that poly object. So we'll do a cube. I'm going to make it completely square because that's easy. All right, now I have to figure out what is the height and width of this building. All right. So how do we go about doing that? We can basically use those sidewalk chunks that we made, right? So it looks like if you want to use the sidewalk chunks, and we agree that that's a good method, the house is approximately 2 to 3, I'd say it's about 3 sidewalk chunks wide. All right, so let's do that. And then how tall do you think that is? Basically what we can do here is we can just kind of base it on stories of buildings. So I believe the rule of thumb is that a story on a building is approximately 15 feet tall. So we can just say that this is 2 stories that I'm trying to build here. So the building is approximately 30 feet tall. Maybe a little taller because this is an older building which probably had a lot higher ceilings. So we could probably do like 35 there and be safe. All right, so based on that, it would be what? 10 units? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then I'm going to add maybe one more for good measure. Okay, and then now we need to subdivide this so that we can start modeling our windows and doors into this building. So we're going to go into the construction parameters here, and we're going to add subdivisions. 4, which is actually going to add up to 5 if I count the edges. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I'm going to subdivide in height, and I'm just going to put 1 in there. And what that's going to do is that's basically giving us, I'm going to switch to wireframe on shaded view now. And that's going to give us the correct number of cutouts to basically model those architectural details in here. So the first one I want to start with is the window. And that keeps coming up. We're going to close that. Is the window here. So let's go ahead and model that in. So at this point, we're going to stop worrying about scale so much, and I'm just going to go based on proportion. Okay, so we have this little window cut out. And you have a number of ways you can do this. All right, so we could cut this in using a Boolean, or we could just go ahead and model it in. I want to, since I showed you guys Booleans in the last lecture video, I want to do it using the modeling technique. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a polygon primitive cube, and I'm just going to make it square to start out. And then I'm going to go ahead and model this. I'm going to model this box here first, so the lower portion of the window. And I believe this has to be a lot smaller, so I'm going to make it something like that. It's about that far off the ground. Now I'm just kind of making it up as I go along. And then what I want to do is I want to make this thing flush to this geometry. So how am I going to do that? I'm going to change the pivot point of the object to be the front of the box there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the V for vertex snap. I'm going to snap it to the vertex of the front of my building. And that's going to basically tell me that it is 100% flush with that structure. Now once it's flush with that structure, now I can go ahead and grab the structure and go into face mode, and I can delete it, because what I'm doing here is I'm basically going to build this window to go into this building, and I no longer need that face anymore because I'm cutting it out. All right. So now I'm going to scale down my window box a little bit to make it about window depth. And then I'm going to go ahead and I need that little arch there. So the way I'm going to do that is by creating a cylinder. And I'm going to scale it up to fit my box. And then I'm going to change its insert pivot point to basically be the front of it also. So I'm going to hold down the V key for snap to vertex, and I'm snapping its pivot point to be at the front of that box. Okay, now once I have that, then I can do the exact same thing. Hold down the V key again and snap it so the vertex snaps to the front of the box there. And all I'm doing is I'm making sure that it's flush with the front of the building, so that they're all basically going to be planar. Then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into the top view, and I want to make sure that it also scales to fit the box that I just made, which it does. And then at this point I could optimize it if I wanted to. I could basically change the number of divisions to be a little less if I wanted to make it a little bit more optimized for low poly. But let's say that I want it to be fairly smooth to begin with, so I would just go ahead and stick with the 20 there to begin with. And then I want to, this is all becoming part of my window box, so I'm going to go ahead and grab some of these faces, and I'm going to delete them out. Now I can go ahead and grab this face, because that's also going to be open, and delete that out, delete that face. And now I want to delete all the front faces off of this. So I'm going to go ahead and select them all. And delete those guys out. And now I'm ready to marry them. So I'm going to go ahead and say Got to get out of the surfaces menu set and get into polygons. I'm going to say mesh combine. And then now I need to weld those verts. So I'm going to go into vertex mode, select the verts I want to weld, and I'm going to say edit mesh, merge, and there we go. Just merged them all together. And technically I need to add another subdivision down the center here. So I'm going to go into my interactive split tool, and I'm just going to go ahead and add that edge in there. And so what that does is it allows me to have a vertex so that I can merge those vertices to it. Before that I did not have that. So now I can go ahead and select that and say edit mesh, merge, and now we have them all merged out together. Okay, so now that I have that, I just want to check my face normals to make sure that they're all facing the proper direction. So I'm going to go ahead and say display polygons and face normals. And now I'm going to start making some buttons to make my life easier. So I'm going to go over here into the custom. And what I want to do is I want to create a button for display face normals so I don't ever have to hunt and peck through that again. And so that I can do it very fastly. So I'm going to go to display, polygons, face normals. And I'm going to hold down the shift and control button simultaneously to make myself a little face normals button. And then I can show them or hide them. All right. Now in this case I want these face normals to go the opposite direction. I want them to be facing inward. So I'm going to go over here to the normals menu set, and I'm going to click on reverse, but I also want to make a button for that also. So I'm going to hold down the shift and control key simultaneously and make a button for reverse, and now I can reverse my normals just by clicking the button. Alright, so now what I need to do is I have my window shape cut into, but now I need the rest of the box, right? That can't just be. So what I'd like to do is optimize this so that this cutout can go into any of these sections here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the Create Polygon tool, or the Polygon menu set. I'm going to go to Mesh, Create Polygon tool, and I'm going to go ahead and start drawing my polygons that I need to fill in this hole, basically one at a time. So I'm going to hold down the V key for vertex, and I'm going to click on my existing vertices, and I'm drawing one polygon. Then I'm going to go into the Draw Polygon tool again, hold down the V again. And that one, of course, I snapped to the wrong one, so I'm going to do that again. And the reason I'm doing it this way is so that I have absolute control over how this gets filled in, right? And so also kind of like I know exactly where everything is in my scene and that it was constructed right to begin with. So I'm just like, what seems like, man, why is he doing it that way? It's taking a long time. Is really because I just want absolute control over all the elements in my scene. Alright, so then we got that. Now it becomes very easy. I just go back in here, and I'm going to hold down the V for snap to vertex again. And in this case, I should probably hide my sidewalk, but I'm too lazy. No, I won't, because I don't want to make a mistake here. So I'm going to grab my sidewalk, create a new layer, call it Sidewalk. And I'll just template it. Actually, no, templates still will make my tool snap, so I don't want that. So I'll create a new one here. Hold down the V for snap to vertex. You want to try to, as much as you can, when you're creating, using the Create Polygon tool, to draw in the same direction, clockwise or counterclockwise. I try to, but I never get it all the way right. So, but you should try also. Maybe you're better than I am at that kind of stuff. Okay, so now I've drawn all the polys that need to fill that. And we know that they're all planar because I made special precautions to make sure they were. Now I just need to combine all these elements. And I'm going to do the exterior part of the building first. And I'm going to say Mesh Combine. And then now I want to see those face normals. So I click on the face normal button. And they're all facing the opposite direction I want them to. So now I'm going to flip them like that. And now that they're flipped and they're all facing the proper direction, now I can then go to the second step, which is I want to combine both of these guys. So I'm going to go to Mesh, Combine. And then now what do I need to do? Because I just combined them, but none of those are welded. So I'm going to go ahead and weld it. And I made one mistake when I created my external mesh here. I needed an extra set of edges there. So I'm going to go ahead and add one. I'm going to go to the interactive split tool here and just add another edge down the center there. And of course it's not going to let me. So what I'm going to do instead, I'm just going to delete that face and I'm going to draw in the new ones. So I'm going to go to Mesh, Create Polygon tool, oops, Vertex Snap, hold on. Here's how we're going to do it. I got to build it first as a poly. Then I'll be able to go into Edit Mesh, Interactive Split, and now I want to check the normals. They're good. And now I can combine it. Mesh, Combine, and then now I can go into Vertex mode and weld all the verts. Edit Mesh, Merge. Okay, all my verts are welded. See, look at this long list of construction history over here. You're going to get that when you start poly modeling, especially to this level of degree. So from time to time, you're also going to want to delete the history on your object by going Edit, Delete by Type History. I want to make a button for that, so I'm going to hold down the Control and Shift keys. And then now all I ever have to do is select the object and hit that button, and it'll delete the history. Okay, and I can go ahead and hide the face normals at this time. And the reason I went ahead and built this object this way is because now if I wanted to, let's say I had a building of another shape, but I wanted to reuse this window. So I'm going to go ahead and create one. I'm going to do a polygon cube. And let's say that this building was ridiculously simple and it just had, this was it, it's like an ice cream store or something. And I wanted this piece that I just modeled to fit into there. I could reuse this by basically any opening in any building, any structure that has 4 sides. I can go ahead and grab this. And I also want to center the pivot on this guy, so I'm going to say Modify Center Pivot. Create a button for that, and I'm going to center the pivot. And then I want to move the pivot to be at the base of the building, so I'm going to go into Insert mode and hold down the vertex for Snap to Vertex and snap it so it's at the front of that structure. And now when I duplicate it and I move it into place, now it's flush with that structure. All I have to do here is center this up. Let's say I wanted just one window in this house. And check out how easy this is. All I have to do is go into vertex mode, hold down the V key, and I can add that window into any structure that has 4 sides. Now you might say, why are you doing that, dude? Why did you take all that time to do that? And the reason is because I plan on modeling the rest of this window out in sufficient detail. So I'm going to add, this is where we're going next. I'm going to model that window out in detail, and what that's going to allow me to do is basically have one detailed window that I model once and then I can reuse and mix and match. And I could basically create, if I did a number of these different style of architectural windows and shutters and everything else, I can mix and match these and make basically a city block in about 1/10 the time that it would take me to model a city block individually. All right, so you want to be thinking of this kind of stuff when you're planning out your environment. You want to kind of judiciously plan out how you're going to model things so that you can maximize and reuse them. All right. So before we do that, though, I want to cover a few other things. Let's do, because before we drill down to more detail, I want to model out the window frame. Let's do the balcony and the and this architectural detail right here. All right. So this thing is pretty involved up here. I'm going to zoom in on it if I can. Will they let me? Okay, so let's do this architectural detail here. All right, so this is pretty crazy. And it looks like, trying to figure it out. It looks like we can just draw this one shape here and extrude that along kind of a cornice path like I did before. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and draw out the shape in the top view. So I'm going to use a CV curve. And then I can just kind of center the pivot on this guy, center that up on my building. And then now let's go ahead and draw that shape, all right? And I don't think I'm going to get this exactly, because I kind of want to get through the lecture, but let's just go ahead and try to approximate as much as we can without actually doing it correctly. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cutouts. Okay. So I'm going to go into the Create CV Curve. Okay, so I know that's not right, but it's close enough. Okay, so now what we want to do is I'm going to grab this building and I want to isolate it. You're going to be wanting to do this more and more as you model. Creating layers for the different objects in your scene and organizing them so you can very quickly hide around, hide up. So now I'm going to select this cornice and I want to center its pivot, its cornice shape. I want to go to insert mode because I want to snap the pivot to the base of it. I always like to do this. And I snap it up onto that line. Then I'm going to select the path, or the shape, and then I'm going to select the path. And I'm going to go ahead and go into the NURBS surfaces panel. And I'm going to say surfaces extrude. Tube, add path, component, profile normal. Complete, polygon is my output. This time instead of general I want to do control points. So I'm going to say apply. And boom, there we go. Now I've got that architectural detail on my building. I'm going to center the pivot and put that into place. Very fast, right? All right, now let's do the balcony. So in this case we can probably just use a poly primitive. And we'll do a cube. And then I'm just going to scale it down and scale it out. So you guys, I know that you were probably at one point trained to model everything as to be one poly object. That's kind of a thing of the past. All the modern game engines can handle having separate objects now. And so now you want to kind of adopt the film methodology, which is to, if it is a separate object, you make it a separate object. Within reason, you don't want to go crazy with that, but it's not necessarily where it used to be where you would model this all out of one box and everything had to be contained in it. We can actually use different pieces, right? So there's my balcony. And this one actually has slats on it, it looks like, that come right over the top on the floor. And it actually looks like it has a shape, so I don't think I can use a box on it. So I need to go ahead and do this the exact same way that I just did it, this little architectural cornice here. So I'm going to create a layer. I'm going to hide this thing and call it cornice. And I'm going to add that path to it. Let's say add selected objects. Okay, so after looking at the photo, I realized that that trim on the balcony actually had a little bit of detail to it. And so I'm actually going to model that in before I do it. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to create another path here. So I'm going to go to Create, CV Curve Tool, and there's my balcony. And then now I need to figure out what the shape is. And again, I'm going to make this up. So I'm going to go here into the front viewport, and I'm going to go into Create, CV Curve Tool. And it looked like just something like this, very simple. It went like that. Oops. And then it might have had like a routed edge to it. And there we go. So then I'm going to center the pivot on that, and then of course I'm always going to snap the pivot to the line and put it at the edge. And then I'm going to go ahead and snap that shape to my curve. Now I can select the shape and the path and say Surfaces, Extrude. Beautiful. And then on the balcony in the illustration, or in the picture, it looks like there's these floor planks that go along. So why don't we go ahead and model those out too. So this time I can use a cube. So I'm going to go to Create, Polygon Primitives, Cube. And I'm going to scale it down to be about a floor plank height, floor plank width, floor plank. Put it onto my frame. Okay. Looks like they kind of overhang on the illustration. And I'm going to go ahead and duplicate one, move it, and then now I can hit Shift D for duplicate with transform. And then the cool thing about this is, see how it's like a little long right there? When I created this using the loft, so this is good for you, Christina. You said, you were talking about box modeling before. But one of the advantages of using the NURBS tools is that you retain this construction history on everything. So if I go to Control Vertex here, see how I can move? So after the fact, my planks basically didn't work out right mathematically, And after the fact, all I have to do is go in the construction history, and I can basically make my balcony shape fit the shape, and it's just a lot easier, a lot more elegant. And you could say you could do that with polygons, but the more complex the shapes get, is once we get into vehicles, you'll see that that wouldn't be so easy anymore. Okay, so we've got our little balcony here modeled. And let's go ahead and now we want to add the railings. So we've got the railings here that wrap around. So that's kind of intricate. I'm like wondering if we have time for me to do that. Why don't we just do it simplified and then all right, so we got our railing there, and basically the way it looks to me is if I wanted to simplify this, it's basically we got a handrail at the top, a sub rail, and another sub rail. So that's 4 rails. All right, so let's go ahead and create that. Again, we can probably just use that same balcony shape that we did before. I'm going to show you the pick masks here real quick. So I'm going to also save this scene. And I want to show you the pick masks. So over here you have your object pick masks. You can go down here and say all objects on or all objects off. By default, it's all objects on. So if I turn them off and then I just say NURBS curves, so if you click and hold it down here, NURBS curves, now when I select, I can only select a NURBS curve. So sometimes that makes it easy to select your objects NURBS curves only. And then if I hit Control D, I can duplicate that object up. And I'm going to center its pivot and move it up. And now I'm going to basically just use that same curve that I drew to make the balcony, to make the handrail. All right. So I'm going to go over here and do the same thing. And we're going to draw the shape for the handrail. So I'm going to go into Create, CV Curve Tool. I'm going to snap this guy, hide the building, snap that to my handrail. I'm going to select the path. Path walks along, I'm sorry, select the shape. Shape walks along the path. I'm going to say extrude. There we go. My railing's probably a little small. So I'm going to turn my pick mask backs for all objects on. Another way to select things is you just marquee drag around one and then deselect the other, and that'll get you the same. Alright, so I'm going to make my hand railing a little larger. At this point I could just reuse that object. I'm going to center its pivot. 1, 2, 3. And then if we want to do the railing, but we want to make it a little bit more interesting, let's go ahead and create one rail. I'm going to do it here in the top view, the little slats. Let's say Create, Polygon Primitives, Cube, make it a cube, move it up, into position here. Now I want to make this basically to be the size of one of these railing slats that goes up and down. And so I'm going to scale it down, move it into position. Needs to be a little smaller. Now I'm going to change its pivot point to be up at the top of, and so then this way I can just scale it down. And now that I can see the top of that, I'm just going to Move the pivot point to coincide with the top. Move it back up. R, scale it down. And this one doesn't go all the way to the floor, so I'm going to leave it right there. Okay, what if we wanted to spin that? So we wanted this to be like a swirl piece of metal, like they do on gates sometimes in like French Quarter homes. How would I accomplish that? What's that? Well, helix would just make it a spiral, like a spring. But you guys actually don't know because I haven't shown it to you. I just try to do that to wake everyone up from time to time. So I'm going to change the number of subdivisions and height to be something much higher, like a 50. It's probably pretty good. And then I want to introduce you to nonlinear deformers. So if we go under the animation menu set, we've got this little tab here called Create Deformers. And these are often used in animation, but they're also very useful for modeling also. So I'm going to go to Create Deformers, and I'm going to use a nonlinear deformer. And the one I want here is called Twist. So I'm going to click on Twist. We don't need the settings at all. So actually didn't initiate it. I'm going to go to Create Deformers, Nonlinear, Twist. And now I have a twist deformer on this object. And I can tell that because it turns pink. So the way I get to the twist parameters, as pretty much with anything inside of Maya, is always under the inputs. So I have the object selected. Under inputs we have twist. And then we have the start angle and the end angle. And look what happens when I start playing with the start angle. We have a twisted.
Wait, how do you get to input then?
It's always, any object in Maya, any object you select always has, if it has a history on it at all, it'll have a little, right below here, shapes, it'll have one that says inputs. This one has no history, so it doesn't have it. But this one does, so it's always under shapes and then inputs. And then all the inputs available are right here. And the one you're looking for on this one is called twist. And the twist will allow you to do what I just did. You can bend it, you can change the high bound or the low bound. So if you wanted part of it to be twisted but not the other part, you can change that. And you can play around with that as much as you want. Figure out how to control it. Let's see here. I don't remember what it started out as. There we go. So, -1 and 1 is the default. And you can play with that around as much as you want. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and use this spindle here over to basically create all my spindles for my deck, or for my railing. So I'm going to use the duplicate special command. So I'm going to select one of them. I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate it. I'm going to move it off. And then now I can do Shift D. Move that one in. And then Control D. Move it back. Shift D. There we go. And then once I have one side of this built, I can just group it and go to Edit, Duplicate Special. And this time I want to duplicate it -X. So I'm going to say 1, -1, and X. Apply. And that's because it wasn't dead center to the world. So I can center the pivot on it. And this time I'm just going to eyeball it. Alright, so there we go. We got our house with our railing. Now we're going to go ahead and keep building out the window frame. So now would probably be a good time to save this guy. Okay, so let's continue modeling out the window now that we have the balcony model. So what we're going to do here, and we also did the cornice piece. So our building's starting to come together. I will point out, though, that I've kind of deviated from keeping everything scaled correctly after a certain point, because I really just want to give you guys the technical skills to be able to do this on your own, rather than me actually building this perfectly during the lecture. All right, so now we want to model out this window frame in detail. So let's go ahead and take a look at what else we need to build. So we have, I'm going to move down the street here a little bit so we can see the window. We have this little archway here. So let's go ahead and model that first. And that actually becomes pretty easy using the NURBS tools also. So I'm going to go into edge mode, and I'm going to select all these edges here. And then I'm going to go into modify, convert, and I'm going to convert these polygon edges to a curve, and I want it to be degree 1 linear, and I'm going to say apply. And what that does is it basically just takes that set of edges and creates a NURBS curve that I can use. Now that I have that NURBS curve, basically I can go into the surfaces settings, and if I go to edit curves, there's a section here for offset curve, and I can basically apply that. And then what it has is it's basically got a setting here where I can offset that curve by a distance, and it's basically just going to create a copy of that curve and offset it precisely along the curve that it's already existed, so that it's kind of easy. All right, now that I have that, I'm going to do negative 0.27, trying to find the distance that I'm looking for, 0.25, negative 0.25, maybe negative 0.2. That looks pretty good. I'll accept that. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select the curve and the other curve, and I'm going to say surfaces loft, which is one of the ones we learned today. And you know what, I'll leave that alone. It lofted it out, and I'm going to go ahead, and now that's a polygon object, so I'm going to center its pivot. And all I would need to do here is just move it out a little bit, go into face mode, and then I can say, go into polygon mode, say edit mesh, extrude. I'm going to go into world mode and just extrude that back. And there we go. So then we want to keep going. And now we've got this window box, all right? And if I zoom in on this, you can see here that there's kind of this trim here that goes all the way from the outside all the way in. And so probably the easiest way for me to do that is to just go ahead and model one piece that then is going to get extruded all the way along the edges here. So I'm going to go ahead and start with a shape in the top view. And I may hide my building. And now that I have a balcony, I'm going to make a new layer and call it balcony. And then I've got a cornice. I already had that cornice layer. But it somehow got undone. So I'm going to select that and add it back. Now I can hide that. So there's my window box, and I want to draw kind of a trim piece that's going to trim out this entire window. So I'm going to go into the Create CV Curve tool, and I'm just going to draw a trim piece here. And then I'm going to make it so that it basically fills up my entire window. So we have a section here for the shutter. So there's a shutter here, and then there's probably, if this was a true functional window, there would probably be a little blocker here to hold that shutter in place. So I'm going to draw that little out tick. And then I know there's also a window in here, so there's going to be another outcropping back here at some point to hold the window in. So I'm going to represent that as well. And then I'm going to go ahead and add another backstop for the window. And then I don't really know what happens beyond that, so I'm going to go ahead and leave that alone. So there's my shape. Of course, it's going to create the center in the worst point possible, so I'm going to center the pivot. And then I want to snap the pivot to my curve itself and put it at the very end. And then now I want to extrude this shape around my entire window box. So if I wanted to get that curve, how would I do that? Does anyone have any idea? If I needed that curve so that I could extrude it, how could I get it? I just selected all the edges. Would I go to Modify, Convert, Polygon Edges to Curve? Thank you, that was right. And then you make it linear, say Apply. And then now what I can do here is take my shape walks along my path. So I'm going to grab my shape and my path, and I'm going to say, go to Surfaces, and we're going to say Extrude. And see how it exploded out like that? Can anyone think of why that may have happened? Well, it's because the center point on my shape is back here, but my curve is up here. So if you don't want that to happen, what I can do is go into Insert mode here, and then hold down the C key for Snap to Curve, and I can snap it to that curve. And then now, when I select that curve and then the path, and I say Surfaces, Extrude again, now it won't move. It'll stay right in position. All right, and so now we got our window box built in there. That's kind of trimmed out. And that didn't close. And the reason why it didn't close was because my curve wasn't closed. So if I want that to close off, I can go into select the curve here. And this may or may not work, but I'm going to try it just to see. If it doesn't, I'm not going to troubleshoot it. I'll troubleshoot it later in class. If this happens to you, you can just leave it alone. I'm going to try to close it. So if you go to Edit Curves, Open, Close Curves, and I'm going to say Shape, Preserve. Nope, wrong. Of course, it breaks it for good. I don't want to troubleshoot this today. If this happens to you, just be aware that we can fix that. Okay, so now we want to go ahead and start adding the framing pieces for the window. Oh, and we're out of time. Okay, so you get the idea. Basically what I was just going to keep doing was add the frame pieces, add the shutters, etc. until you get the window built out completely. Then remember, all those objects were built in a way that I could reuse them in any scene or any building, any sort of structure that it basically has a four-sided polygon where I can insert that and then I can slide that right in there. So you want to be thinking economically while you're setting up your scene to be able to reuse pieces. Okay.